A weapon existed on paper that would make war impossible. Aircraft would fall out of the sky at 400 kilometers. Battleships would sink at anchor. Armies would refuse to march. Its inventor was 78 years old and living alone in a New York hotel room. He offered the design to 5 governments in the same year. All 5 refused. He died alone 9 years later. Within hours of his death, the FBI seized every piece of paper in his room. Almost built. Case number 073, the weapon that would have ended all war. Nikola Tesla was 78 years old in the summer of 1934. He was living in a small suite on the 33rd floor of the Hotel New Yorker in Manhattan. He owed the hotel 18 months of back rent. He fed pigeons on the windowsill. Newspaper reporters who visited him described a very thin man in a threadbare black suit, always wearing gloves indoors, refusing to shake hands, and speaking in a soft, precise voice about ideas nobody around him understood. He was the same man who had built the alternating current system that powered every home in America. He was the same man who had lit Niagara Falls. He was the same man who 30 years earlier had convinced J.P. Morgan to fund a tower on Long Island that was supposed to broadcast free electricity to the entire planet. The tower had failed. Morgan had cut the funding. Tesla had never recovered financially or professionally. Almost every scientist his age was retired or dead. Tesla was neither. He was still working. Since Wardenclyffe collapsed in 1904, he had filed 39 additional patents. Most were small refinements of existing designs. But since 1930, he had been working on something he did not patent, something he refused to draw completely in any single notebook, something he claimed would make every existing weapon on Earth obsolete overnight. He called it Teleforce. The newspapers called it the death ray. A colleague who visited him in the summer of 1934 later reported that Tesla spoke about Teleforce the way a man speaks about a beloved child. He said Tesla had every detail of the machine in his head. He said Tesla was afraid to write it all down in one place. The world in 1934 was preparing for a war everyone could see coming. Germany had elected Hitler in January 1933. Within 18 months, the Reichstag was rearming in violation of the Versailles Treaty. Italy under Mussolini was preparing to invade Ethiopia. Japan had already occupied Manchuria. The Soviet Union under Stalin was building the largest standing army in Europe. France had begun construction on the Maginot Line at a cost of 3 billion francs. Every major nation understood that another world war would be worse than the first. The last war had killed 17 million people with weapons that were, by 1934 standards, primitive. New aircraft carried heavier bombs, new tanks moved faster, new submarines dove deeper. Chemical warfare was becoming standard. A future war would be catastrophic. Any weapon that could stop war before it started was worth almost any price. Tesla had one, or he said he had one. He was offering it to any government willing to fund the final construction. He believed the weapon would be so absolute in its defensive capability that no nation would ever attempt to attack another. The particle beam would destroy every incoming aircraft, every incoming missile, every advancing ground formation at ranges far beyond any existing artillery. It would be, he said, the end of the age of offensive warfare. He called it a peace ray. The newspapers called it a death ray. Both were correct. The engineering was based on principles Tesla had been developing since the 1890s. Focused streams of tungsten or mercury ions accelerated to near relativistic velocities by an open vacuum electrostatic gun. The particles would carry enough kinetic energy to punch through aircraft hulls, ignite fuel tanks, and detonate stored ordnance. All from a fixed installation on the ground. All at ranges up to 400 kilometers. Tesla was 78, penniless, and offering the most valuable weapon idea in history to whoever would fund him. He expected an immediate response. Here's what almost was. The first problem was Tesla's reputation. 30 years earlier, he had promised J.P. Morgan a wireless electricity tower that would broadcast power to the entire planet. The tower was built. It cost $150,000. It never broadcast anything. Morgan lost the money. Tesla lost his standing in every serious engineering community. Since then, Tesla had appeared in newspapers regularly, always with new, fantastic claims. In 1908, he claimed his oscillator had caused the Tunguska explosion in Siberia. In 1912, he described a machine that could photograph human thoughts. In 1926, he predicted wireless communication devices small enough to fit in a pocket. Most engineers who read these interviews considered him a brilliant mind that had drifted into fantasy. By 1934, Tesla was widely regarded within the physics establishment as a genius who had gone permanently strange. Serious researchers avoided quoting him. University departments did not invite him to speak. The National Academy of Sciences had not corresponded with him in over a decade. When he announced Teleforce, most of the scientific community assumed it was another beautiful hallucination. The second problem was that the engineering could not be checked. A conventional weapon can be tested by building it and firing it. Teleforce required, according to Tesla, an initial capital investment of approximately $2 million for the first working installation. That was equivalent to about $45 million in modern currency. No government would authorize that expense without prior technical verification. Tesla refused to provide the complete design in advance. His reasoning was consistent across every letter and interview he gave on the subject. He believed if the complete plans left his personal control, they would be copied, misunderstood, and eventually built as an offensive weapon rather than a defensive one. He would only reveal the full design to a government that had committed the funding, signed an exclusive treaty, and agreed to use the weapon only for territorial defense. No engineer could evaluate Teleforce without seeing the full design. No government would fund the design without seeing it evaluated first. The impasse was permanent. Tesla did not accept this. In July 1934, Tesla sent formal proposals to 5 governments in the same week. The first went to the White House and was addressed personally to President Roosevelt. The second went to the British Foreign Office. The third went to King Alexander of Yugoslavia, Tesla's country of birth. The fourth went to the government of France. The fifth went through intermediaries at Amtorg Trading Corporation to Joseph Stalin. Every proposal contained the same basic terms. Tesla would build a functioning Teleforce installation for $2 million. The funding government would receive exclusive rights to the technology for defensive purposes only. Tesla would personally supervise construction over approximately 3 months. He waited for replies. The White House did not reply. The British Foreign Office replied with a form acknowledgement that made no commitment. King Alexander of Yugoslavia was assassinated in Marseille in October 1934 before he could respond personally. The French government forwarded the proposal to its Ministry of War and never took any documented further action. Only the Soviet Union responded with actual money. In April 1935, Amtorg Trading Corporation, the American commercial arm of the Soviet government, paid Tesla $25,000. The payment was in exchange for a preliminary technical document describing the general principles of Teleforce. It was not a construction contract. It was, by all documented accounts, an evaluation payment. Soviet engineers in Moscow would review the material and determine whether to proceed with a full contract. The evaluation was conducted at a research facility in Leningrad between the spring and autumn of 1935. 6 Soviet physicists and 2 military engineers reviewed the material. Their report has never been publicly declassified by any Russian government since. Amtorg made no further payments to Tesla. No follow-up contract was signed. Tesla continued corresponding with Amtorg through 1938 without ever receiving another dollar. Whatever the Soviet engineers concluded from Tesla's preliminary document, they concluded it privately. Whether they built anything based on the material, they built it in silence. Nobody outside a very small circle in Soviet military intelligence knows what became of that document. The $25,000 kept Tesla alive for 2 more years. By 1938, Tesla was 72 years old and effectively broke. The Soviet payment had been spent on hotel bills, food for pigeons, and small refinements he made to the Teleforce design in his own head. The Yugoslav government under the new Regent Paul had begun paying him a small monthly stipend of $600, essentially a state pension in recognition of his origins. It was enough to keep him housed, but not enough to build anything. He continued to write letters. He wrote to Roosevelt again in 1937. He wrote to the American War Department in 1938. He wrote to the National Defense Research Committee in 1940 after it was formed under the Emergency Wartime Authorization Act. The War Department created an internal file on Tesla. Officers in the Office of Scientific Research and Development read his letters and forwarded them within the bureaucracy without acting on them. Some of these internal memoranda have been declassified. They describe Tesla with polite skepticism. Nobody wanted to say publicly that a Nobel-adjacent electrical genius was a crackpot. Nobody was willing to fund him either. But between the Yugoslav stipend arriving in 1936 and the Soviet interest dying in 1938, there was one moment when Teleforce almost became real. July 4th, 1934, Independence Day, Tesla's 78th birthday. Tesla convened a press conference at the Hotel New Yorker for his birthday. 14 major American and European newspapers sent reporters. He appeared in his formal black suit, spoke for 2 hours, and announced Teleforce publicly for the first time. The announcement was specific. He claimed the weapon could destroy 10,000 incoming aircraft at a range of 400 kilometers. He claimed it would render national borders permanently defensible. He claimed the first working installation could be built in 3 months for $2 million. The New York Times ran the story on page 1 the following morning. Headline: Tesla at 78 reveals new power for war. The article was reprinted across the wire services in every English-speaking country and translated into French, German, Italian, and Russian within days. Tesla received 740 pieces of correspondence in the following month. Most were from private citizens. Some were from foreign inventors offering to collaborate. A few were from government intelligence services in code requesting private meetings. None were from the President of the United States, which was the reply Tesla had been waiting for. He wrote 3 additional public letters to newspapers over the following 6 months. Each contained additional technical details about Teleforce. None revealed enough to allow independent construction. Each concluded with a direct appeal to the American government to fund the project. By late 1934, Life magazine had commissioned a full profile of Tesla titled "A Genius Who Might Save the World." The profile was scheduled for the January 1935 issue. The profile ran, and the funding did not come. Tesla was more famous in early 1935 than at any point since the 1890s. He was also, in the same period, closer to complete professional isolation than he had ever been. On December 7, 1941, the United States entered the war Tesla had been predicting since 1934. He was 85 years old. He had been writing about defensive particle beam weapons for 14 years. Every government he had contacted had ignored him, and now the war he claimed his weapon would prevent was happening at global scale. He wrote a final letter to Roosevelt in March 1942. The letter arrived at the White House. It was forwarded to the War Department. The War Department forwarded it to the Office of Scientific Research and Development. The office responded with a polite acknowledgement noting that all wartime research priorities were currently focused on radar and heavy ordnance. The Manhattan Project had begun 6 months earlier. Tesla's proposal was for a weapon system that could stop aircraft. The Manhattan Project was for a weapon system that could vaporize cities. The bureaucracy had chosen its direction. Tesla did not receive another government reply. Tesla died on January 7, 1943. He was 86 years old. He was found in his hotel room by a housekeeper who had been asked to check on him after he failed to answer the door for 2 days. The cause of death was determined to be coronary thrombosis. He had died sometime the previous evening. The exact time was never established. Within 4 hours of the death notification reaching Washington, the alien property custodian dispatched 2 federal agents to the Hotel New Yorker. They arrived at approximately 3 in the afternoon. They demanded access to the suite. The hotel manager unlocked the door. The agents removed every notebook, every diagram, every letter, every technical file, and every private correspondence in the suite. The material filled 17 sealed metal trunks. The trunks were shipped that same evening to a Bureau of Standards facility in Washington, D.C. The seizure was technically legal. Tesla had never been an American citizen. His property fell under wartime custodial authority. But the speed and precision of the operation suggested it had been prepared in advance. One meeting killed the public knowledge of Teleforce. A young MIT physicist named John Trump was assigned to evaluate the seized material. Trump was the uncle of a future American president. His formal report, delivered in late January 1943, concluded that Tesla's Teleforce documents contained no practical weapon design of military value. That report has never been fully declassified. Portions of the seized material were released to Tesla's nephew in Yugoslavia in 1952. Other portions remain classified in Washington today. Nobody has confirmed publicly whether Teleforce ever worked. The 17 trunks of Tesla papers moved through several federal custodians between 1943 and 1952. The initial evaluation by John Trump was followed by re-evaluations conducted by the Office of Naval Research in 1945 and again by the Central Intelligence Group, the predecessor to the CIA, in 1947. each evaluation reached the same official conclusion. Nothing in the papers constituted a practical weapon design. Each evaluation also resulted in additional documents being separated from the main archive and placed in specialized classified files. By the time the bulk of the archive was released to Tesla's nephew Sava Kosanovich in 1952 and shipped to Belgrade, approximately 300 technical documents from the original collection had been permanently retained by American intelligence agencies. Those documents remain classified to this day, 73 years later. The FBI declassification portal lists Tesla's file as containing over 100 remaining redacted pages. In Belgrade, Kosanovich deposited the returned material at the Tesla Museum, founded in 1952 specifically to house it. The Belgrade collection contains approximately 150,000 pages of Tesla's writings, drawings, calculations, and correspondence. It is one of the most complete personal archives of any scientific figure in history. But the specific documents relating to Teleforce, according to the museum's own catalog, arrived incomplete. Multiple diagrams referenced in Tesla's own correspondence were missing from the material Kosanovich received. The museum staff assumed the missing pages had been separated during the American custodial period. The pattern of what was released and what was kept suggests American intelligence retained specifically the operational details of the particle beam accelerator, while releasing the theoretical framework surrounding it. Nobody has publicly built a working Teleforce. But research into particle beam weapons has continued for 80 years. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative funded classified research at Los Alamos and Livermore on ground-based particle beam weapons intended to destroy Soviet missiles from ranges of several hundred kilometers. The funding was reduced after the Cold War ended, but never terminated. Modern DARPA research on directed energy weapons includes classified particle beam programs whose origins are not public. Some declassified acknowledgments reference concepts developed in the 1940s. Insiders have suggested some of Tesla's seized documents contributed to the theoretical basis of these programs. No working ground-based particle beam weapon has ever been publicly demonstrated at anything close to the scale Tesla described. Modern physics suggests the theoretical requirements are extreme, but not impossible. The Hotel New Yorker still stands at 481 8th Avenue in Manhattan. Room 3327 is a regular guest room today. The management does not advertise its former occupant. The pigeons still gather on the windowsills. Guests often notice them. Almost nobody knows why. The blueprints still exist. Some in Belgrade, some in Washington, some possibly nowhere. A weapon existed on paper that would make war impossible. Aircraft would fall out of the sky at 400 kilometers. Battleships would sink at anchor. Armies would refuse to march. Its inventor was 78 years old and living alone in a New York hotel room. He offered it to 5 governments in the same year. All 5 refused. He died alone 9 years later. The FBI took every paper in the room within hours. Some of them are still classified. The weapon was never built.